Good evening, and welcome back. Pull whatever you have close. A blanket, a drink, a sleeping animal on your feet. If you are listening from somewhere cold, I want you to know that I am thinking of you. If you are somewhere warm, I'm slightly jealous, but only slightly. Wherever you are, drop a note in the comments, leave a message, let us know. The community of people who sit with these old stories in the dark is larger than you might think, and I find that comforting. I find it more than comforting, actually. I find it essential. Tonight we are going somewhere most people think they already know. They have heard the name. They have seen the paintings. The pale girl, the reaching hand, the chariot going down. They think they understand what happened, and most of them have it almost entirely wrong, because the story of Persephone is not at its center a story about abduction. It is not a story about a mother's grief, though the grief is real and enormous, and I will not minimize it. It is not even ultimately a story about the seasons, though the seasons are there, faithful as metaphor. It is a story about a woman who found her sovereignty in the place everyone was sure would destroy her. Let me start before her. Let me start before almost everything. In the beginning, which was not really a beginning because there was no time yet into which a beginning could be inserted, there was chaos. The word has collected the wrong connotations over the millennia. We use it now to mean disorder, noise, catastrophe, the moment before your flight when you realize your passport is in the other bag. But chaos in the oldest understanding was not disorder. It was potential so complete that it had not yet troubled itself with taking a shape. A vast and dimensionless dark, not empty but pre-full, the way a held breath is not nothing. It was everything before everything decided what it was. Out of chaos came Erebus, the dark, and Nyx, the night. Some sources treat these as abstract forces, and some treat them as persons, and perhaps the distinction was never as clean as we would like. They are both, or neither. Erebus was the darkness of the underworld, the thick underground dark that has no memory of the sun. Nyx was the darkness of the sky after the light withdrew, which has a different quality entirely, a darkness still shaped by what it replaced. These two together, the absolute dark and the sky dark, came together, and from that union, because everything in the old cosmologies comes from a union, came ether and hemera, the upper air and the day. Light was born from the deepest dark. The storytellers knew exactly what they were doing, even when they pretended otherwise. But chaos also produced, from itself and without partner, Gaia, the earth, and Tartarus, the deepest pit, the prison below the underworld, and Eros, which was not yet the impish archer you are picturing, but was rather the fundamental principle of desire, the force that makes things want to combine into other things. And Nyx, who was one of the oldest powers, produced alone and in extraordinary proliferation, sleep and death, strife and fate, the Hesperides, and the Moirai. She produced so many things that her catalogue reads like a list someone was making at the end of a very long day, running through what they had not yet included. But every item on that list is important. Every child of Nyx became something the world could not function without. Gaia was the ground of all possibility. She rose and was the world, first as rock and ocean, And then she produced Uranos, the sky, from herself, and she took Uranos as her companion, and the sky arched over the earth in what the Greeks seem to have understood as both cosmological fact and permanent embrace. Uranos was vast, and he was loving in the early accounts, though loving in the way that sometimes shades into suffocation. He lay with Gaia constantly. He was always there, pressing down. The Titans were born from this, 12 of them, enormous beings of power and will, and Gaia loved them, and Uranos feared them. And what Uranos feared, he tried to swallow, to send back, to deny. He pushed the children back into their mother as they emerged. He refused to let them exist in the world he covered. What it must have been like for Gaia. I think about this sometimes. To be the world itself, and to carry your children inside you, unable to release them, because the sky you loved chose fear over generosity. She was in constant labor that never resolved. She was in perpetual pain. She asked her children, even through the earth, to help her. She fashioned a sickle from the hard grey flint she found in herself, and she passed it to whichever of her Titan children would take it. The youngest, Cronos, the one sometimes called He of the Sickle, sometimes translated as time, though the etymology is disputed, Cronos took the blade. And when Uranos next came to Gaia in the night, as he always came, Cronos waited and struck, and the wound he opened was not merely physical, but ontological, the severing of sky from earth as a permanent condition. The sky went up, the earth remained below. The castration of Uranos is a myth about the origin of vertical distance, about why we look up at the sky and not into it, why we cannot touch it, why the intimate union of the oldest elements was ended so that everything else could begin. The blood of Uranos fell into the sea. The Furies emerged from it, the ash tree nymphs, the giants. Aphrodite rose later from the sea foam where the severed parts fell, which is another story and a long one. Cronos was now the ruler of everything. He had done what his mother asked, but Cronos had heard the prophecy, because there is always a prophecy, and the prophecy said what all these prophecies say, that what you did to your father, your child will do to you. So Cronos did what Uranos had done. He could not push his children back into Gaia, so he swallowed them into himself as they were born. Rhea bore him child after child, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and each time Cronos took the infant and swallowed it whole, the cycle continued, the crime passed down. But Rhea, like Gaia before her, grew in her grief to a determination that is its own form of power. When Zeus was born, the sixth child, the last, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and gave it to Cronos, who swallowed the stone, satisfied. Zeus was hidden. He was raised in Crete, in a cave, tended by nymphs, nursed by a goat, guarded by the Curetes, who clashed their weapons whenever the child cried, so Cronos would not hear his voice. The child, who would change everything, was kept beneath, in secret, in the dark. Not unlike the queen who comes later in our story. Zeus grew. He came back. He found an ally, some say Metis, the titaness of wisdom and cunning, gave him an emetic that forced Cronos to vomit up what he had swallowed. The stone came first. Then the five gods, fully grown, re-emerged into the world with all their divinity intact, if somewhat indignant. And the Titanomachy began, the great war of the Titans against these new gods, which was not really a war so much as a slow rearrangement of who held power over a universe that had already been rearranged once before. 10 years the war lasted, or at least the accounts agree it was long. Zeus freed the Cyclopes from their prison, and they gave him the thunderbolt. He freed the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, and they hurled mountains. The Titans fought back with what they had, which was considerable. They were not weak, these old beings, and some among them had gifts beyond the simple application of force. But the new gods had something the Titans perhaps underestimated. They had grown up in the world, not above it or through it, and they understood it in ways the Titans, who were the world's first bones and first forces, did not quite. The old powers are always overthrown by the powers that come from inside the old world. When it was done, Kronos and the rebel Titans were thrown into Tartarus, the pit beneath everything, where Uranos had once tried to send the children he feared. The punishment rhymed with the crime, as these things always do in the old accounts. The universe tends toward a rough poetic justice, even when it cannot manage any other kind. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots for the dominion of the world. This is important. It was not conquest. It was allocation. It was the gods themselves imposing a system on their victory rather than letting it remain in the brute form of whoever hit hardest. The lots were drawn. Zeus took the sky and the upper world, the bright domain of law and governance. Poseidon took the sea, which suited him, turbulent, ungovernable in the way of things that are technically governed. Hades took the underworld. Some tellings add that the earth was shared among all three, which is why mortals had shrines to each in every landscape. A cliff edge was Poseidon's, a dark grove was Hades, the summit was Zeus's. But the earth in the middle, the living earth, the place where mortals walked and grew things and built cities, that was common ground. It belonged to everyone, and therefore to no single god absolutely, which is perhaps why mortals were always so confused about whom to pray to, and why the gods were always fighting over territories that should have been settled. Into this ordered world, this world of three brothers and their allocated dominions, Demeter was given something particular. She was one of the Olympians. Yes, one of the 12 or 6 or however many you count, depending on which source you hold. But she was given something more specific than a sea or a sky. She was given the grain, the earth's fertility, the ability to make things grow or withhold that growth. It seems like a quiet gift compared to thunderbolts and ocean storms, but you only need to go without bread for a few days to understand that it is not quiet at all. Demeter loved her daughter with a kind of love that has no edges, no boundaries between self and object. Persephone, also called Kor, simply the maiden, the name emphasizing her youth and her as yet unformed quality, was Demeter's entirety. There is something both beautiful and suffocating about this in the old accounts. Persephone is depicted before the descent as primarily Demeter's daughter, rather than as a fully realized entity herself. She gathered flowers with the nymphs. She walked in meadows. She was bright and young and spring-like and defined almost entirely by her mother's love for her. This is something the storytellers encoded, I think deliberately. The Persephone who existed before the descent was not yet Persephone. She was potential, like chaos in the beginning. The form she would take required the descent. The queen was not available until she had gone below. Hades had wanted a wife for some time. The underworld was not without its grandeur. It was the realm of all the dead, vast beyond comprehension, ruled with a kind of cold equity that Hades himself seemed to embody. But it was not warm. It was not growing. Everything in it was finished. Hades himself was described by later writers with a respect that contained a kind of distance. He was just, they said, but he was not loved. He received prayers rarely and with reluctance, because to pray to the god of death was to remind yourself what waited. He was the necessary god, which is a very lonely thing to be. He saw Persephone. The accounts differ on the circumstances. Some place the meadow in Sicily, some in Arcadia. Some say it was near Enna, where the earth is particularly rich. But they agree on the flowers. She was among flowers when the earth opened. She had reached for a narcissus. And here the symbolism is almost too legible. The flower associated with self-regard and also with death. The flower that grows near water where the dead must drink and the ground split. And here is where you must hold two things at once, because the old myths ask this of you constantly. Hades took her. The ancient word is harpazo, which carries connotations of seizure, of force. She cried out. Her mother heard nothing. The flowers fell, the earth closed, and yet the pomegranate. We will come to the pomegranate. We are not ready for it yet. Demeter searched. This is the part of the myth that every version keeps, because it is the part that is also the explanation for everything the Greeks experienced in their world. The part of the year when nothing grows, when the earth pulls into itself and refuses. Demeter searched, and because she searched, she neglected the grain. And because she neglected the grain, the earth went silent and dead. She walked as a mortal woman, an old woman, through the world. She sat at wells and rested on stone walls, and was taken in by families who recognized something about her, even when they did not know her name. There is a famous episode at Eleusis, which will matter later. Demeter came to Eleusis and sat at a well, and the daughters of the king Celeus found her and brought her to their mother Metaneira, and Demeter became the nurse of the young prince Demephon. She tried to make Demephon immortal. She held him over fire each night, burning away the mortal parts of him, and she would have succeeded. But Metaneira saw and screamed, and the ritual was broken, and Demephon remained mortal. Demeter, revealed in her divine rage, demanded a temple and a cult. The Elusinian mysteries began there, as an apology or as a bargain. We will return to Eleusis. The story demands it. But Demeter's grief did not abate, and the earth starved. Mortals died in the famine that her absence created, and the gods received no sacrifices from the dying. And Zeus understood that this could not continue. He sent messengers to Demeter. He sent the gods in their brightness and their persuasion. She refused them all. There was nothing, she told them, that would move her while her daughter was below. So Zeus sent Hermes. Hermes went down. He went into the underworld with that ease peculiar to him. The only Olympian who moved freely between all realms. He had escorted the dead long enough that the dark was not strange to him. He found Hades on his throne and Persephone beside him, and what he found there was not what the Olympians expected. She was not weeping. Some accounts say she was still grieving. Others say she sat with a kind of quietness that was different from grief. What all accounts agree on is this: before Hermes arrived, before the message of her return was delivered, Persephone ate the pomegranate, 6 seeds, or 3 seeds, depending on which account, or a single pomegranate, a single taste. The number shifts across tellings, which suggests something. The Greeks themselves were not sure, or they were sure and were deliberately being unclear, which is how you protect a sacred ambiguity. What you eat in the land of the dead binds you to it. This is ancient logic, pre-Greek, as old as any mythology. The threshold of the dead is maintained partly by what you consume there. To eat is to incorporate, to make part of yourself. And if you incorporate the food of the dead into your living body, you carry the dead world inside you always. Persephone knew this. The question that has occupied scholars and poets and ordinary readers for 2.5 millennia is whether she knew it before she ate. I'm not going to give you a clean answer. I'm going to tell you that the myth, in its oldest and most intact versions, does not give a clean answer either, and that this seems to be intentional. Persephone says, in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, that Hades gave her the seeds, that he compelled her. She frames it as something done to her, but she also says it in the company of her mother, in the version of the story being told to Demeter, to Hermes, to the gods assembled to negotiate her return. She tells it to the people who need to hear a particular story, and she goes back. Every year she goes back. Not dragged, not compelled. The agreement that resolves the crisis, 6 months above, 6 months below, or 3 and 3, depending on your source and your climate, is presented as a negotiated settlement. But Persephone is one of its terms and not merely its subject. She holds to it with a fidelity that suggests something other than resignation. Let me collect the thread here a moment, because we have arrived at the hinge of everything, and I want to be careful. The Greeks told this story to explain the seasons. Every schoolchild is told this. Persephone goes below. Demeter grieves. The earth goes cold. Persephone returns. Demeter rejoices. The flowers come back. It is one of the oldest explanatory myths we have access to, and it is so elegant in its mechanism that it tends to end the conversation there. But the Elusinian mysteries, the great secret rites that took place every year for nearly 2,000 years at Eleusis, attended by virtually every significant figure in the ancient world at some point, protected with such secrecy that we still do not fully know what happened in them. The mysteries were about Persephone, not about the seasons, not about agriculture, or only incidentally about agriculture. They were about death. They were about what it means to go into the darkness and come back changed. They were, so far as scholars can determine from the fragments and hints and oblique references that escape the secrecy requirement, about the discovery that the descent is survivable, that the dark is not the end. This is the deeper story. The seasons are the surface, and even the surface is not nothing. Bread is not nothing. The return of spring is not nothing. These are among the most important things in the world, but below that, the promise that the one who goes below comes back, that the title she carries, Queen of the Dead, Dread Persephone, Lady of the Underworld, is not a diminishment, but a kind of terrible promotion. She rules down there. She is not imprisoned. She makes decisions. The myths in which Heracles comes to the underworld, or Orpheus or Odysseus, or any of the many heroes who descend and need something from the world below. They must get permission from Hades, yes, but they must also get permission from Persephone. Or they ask her specifically, because Hades has the power, but she has the sympathy, the memory of the upper world still warm in her. She is the point of access. She is the one who might understand what it means to have someone you love still among the living. She is, in the underworld, what she could not quite be in the meadow, herself. I need to sit with Demeter for a while before we move forward, because the grief in this myth is real, and I do not want to rush past it in my haste to rehabilitate the daughter. Demeter is the mother who loses her child. Every mother reading this knows that fear in some form. Every person who has ever loved someone with the kind of love that does not know how to distribute itself across more than one object. You know Demeter. She is not wrong to grieve. She is not wrong to rage. She is not wrong to let the earth go dry in her fury and her sorrow, because she is the earth, in a sense. And what else would grief look like in the body of a goddess who is also the grain? But there is always a but in these myths. The but is not a negation of everything before it. It is the second half of a true thing. Demeter's love, in holding Persephone so close, so completely, had perhaps kept her daughter from becoming. The goddess of grain knows the paradox she lives. The seed must go into the dark ground, must seem to die, must be lost for a season before it can rise and be what it was always meant to be. She knows this. She practices this every year, in every field, in every garden. The seed below is not dead. It is becoming. Her own daughter had to become below, and Demeter, for all her wisdom about grain and growing, grieved as a mother and not as a goddess of agriculture. Perhaps that is entirely right. Perhaps the distance between the wisdom of the field and the love for your child is appropriate, is even necessary. Perhaps we do not want our grief to be wise. Perhaps grief that is immediately philosophical is grief that is not quite grief at all. Persephone came from two things: the light above, where Demeter grew the world's food, and the dark below, where her father's brother had built his kingdom of the finished. She was the child of grain and death from the beginning, even before she ate the seeds. The descent was not an accident visited on her by fate. It was. The old stories insist on this, in the way that old stories insist on things, not by saying them directly, but by making every detail point in the same direction. It was where she was always going. Now we must speak of Hades, whom everyone misunderstands in the other direction. Hades is not evil. He is not cruel in the way that cruelty requires a victim who does not deserve it. He is the necessary power, the god of a realm that must exist, because death must exist, because the world cannot hold all of the dead and the living simultaneously without some economy of passage. What he did in the seizure is not defensible. I am not defending it. But Hades, across the full body of Greek mythology, is depicted as fair, as keeping his word, as ruling with a consistency that the Olympians above often fail to match. He never cheated at dice. He never had affairs. He never metamorphosed into a swan or a shower of gold. He stayed in his kingdom. He did his work, and he wanted a companion because the kingdom of the dead is particularly ill-suited to solitude. He asked Zeus first, "Zeus, gave permission. Zeus's culpability in this is often overlooked in tellings that focus on the sympathy-generating figures. But Zeus arranged it. The plan was made above, in the light, by the god who was supposed to protect the world's order. He gave away his sister's daughter without asking the mother, without asking the daughter, in the way that men with authority have always given away women without asking them. When Hermes came with the message and Hades agreed to return Persephone, he wept. That detail appears in the Homeric hymn. Hades wept. He did not refuse, because Hades understood that the world's balance required Persephone's partial return. But he wept. And then, gently, which the text insists on, gently, he told her of the arrangement, and he told her the seeds were there if she wanted them. Some say, others say, the pomegranate sits at the center of the myth, and it will not explain itself. What is not disputed? She ate. She swallowed the seeds, and the arrangement was made, and she rose, and the earth bloomed again in Demeter's joy, and the festival was celebrated, and the world was right again with a new shape that it had not had before, a shape that included a queen in the underworld, a queen who returned in autumn and brought the dark with her, and rose in spring and brought flowers. The heroes knew her. Let us speak of them. Heracles came down. This was his 12th labor, the labor that was supposed to kill him, the one Eurystheus assigned with exactly that hope. He had to bring back Cerberus, the dog who guards the gate of the dead, and he had to bring it alive. Cerberus was not a pet. Cerberus was a function, a living lock on the passage between the worlds, and to remove him temporarily was to make the border between life and death somewhat permeable in ways that nobody entirely wanted. Heracles had been initiated at Eleusis before he descended. This is a detail the ancient sources include with what seems like care. He was purified. He was prepared. He underwent the ritual that Demeter had established. The initiation did not give him the powers he had, but it gave him the permission, the pattern of descent and return that the mysteries taught. He went down, and he stood before Hades and Persephone on their twin thrones, and Heracles, being Heracles, did not prostrate himself or speak carefully. He asked loudly, and then he asked again. And Persephone, the accounts say, was moved by him. She granted him permission. She told Hades to let Cerberus go with the hero on the condition that Heracles used no weapons, only his bare strength, which was the condition that let the thing become a labor instead of a slaughter. Heracles wrestled the three-headed dog at the gate of the dead. He used his bare hands and his lionskin cloak, and he held all three heads simultaneously until Cerberus submitted. He brought it up into the light, showed it to Eurystheus, who reportedly hid under his throne at the sight of it, and then he brought the dog back. He returned what was borrowed. This is not always mentioned in the summary versions, that he returned Cerberus. He did not keep the thing. He borrowed it, fulfilled his purpose, and gave it back. Heracles, in the depth of his complexity, in the catastrophic tragedy of the rest of his life, understood the economy of the underworld better than most. Persephone had given him something in granting him access, but the debt was paid. That is how the underworld works. There is always an accounting. Orpheus descended, and the story has been told so many times that it has gone smooth, like sea glass, the sharp edges worn away by too much handling. But let me try to restore some of its roughness. Orpheus was the greatest musician who ever lived in the mythological world. And this is saying something, because the world was full of divine musicians, because Apollo himself played the lyre, because music was considered one of the fundamental powers of the cosmos. And yet Orpheus surpassed them. He could charm the rocks, the rivers, the wild animals who came to sit at his feet and listen. Music is the art that crosses the border between the living and the inanimate, that makes the unfeeling feel, and Orpheus had that power in its absolute form. He had it, and it was not enough. Eurydice died on the day of their wedding. A snakebite, the accounts agree. She was fleeing someone's unwanted attention, some versions say, or she simply stepped wrong, or fate had always intended the wedding day to be the funeral day, and the wedding was just the frame that made the death more terrible. She went to the underworld as all the dead do, and Orpheus stood in the living world and could not accept it. He went down. He brought his lyre. He played as he descended, and everything in the underworld stopped to listen. The shades who were being tortured in Tartarus stopped in their suffering. The water of Lethe stopped. The Furies wept, which they never did. Sisyphus sat down on his boulder. The wheel of Ixion slowed. The music undid the mechanical punishments of the underworld by making everything present in the only moment where suffering cannot operate, which is the moment of beauty. He stood before Hades and Persephone. He played. Persephone wept. This is in the accounts with a specificity that matters. Persephone, who had made herself into the queen of the dead, who had accepted her role with all its weight, who had not wept at the fate of individual shades even when she pitied them. She wept because the music was too good, yes, but perhaps also because she knew what Orpheus was asking. She knew what it meant to love something on one side of that border and be on the other side. Hades granted the request. He granted it because Persephone asked, or wept, or simply because the music was that good, and even the Lord of the Dead could recognize when the rules were being superseded by something older than the rules. Eurydice could go back. The one condition: Orpheus must not look back. The condition is so simple. The condition is so devastatingly simple. And it never works. Orpheus led Eurydice upward through the passages of the dead. He could not hear her footsteps. The dead are light. And perhaps he began to doubt. Perhaps the silence that follows a dead woman is indistinguishable from the silence of an empty passage. Perhaps he had always been someone who could not entirely trust what he could not see. Perhaps it was not doubt, but a kind of love that could not bear the distance that needed to confirm that reached back. He turned. Eurydice's shade began to recede, already pulled back, and she said, some accounts say she said nothing. Some say she said goodbye. Some say she said his name. She went back. He tried to follow. The ferryman would not take him twice. He returned to the living world and wandered, playing music that was not beautiful anymore, but something else, something that expressed a grief too large for beauty. He refused all other women. He gathered the young men of Thrace around him instead. The Maenads, the ecstatic women who followed Dionysus. tore him apart eventually, for the slight of rejection or because his music had become something they could not coexist with. His head floated down the river Hebrus, still singing, and reached the island of Lesbos, and the Muses buried his body at the foot of Mount Olympus, where the nightingales sing more sweetly than anywhere else. Persephone had done what she could. She had been moved, she had helped, and it had not been enough, because Orpheus was a man who could enchant everything in the universe except his own doubt. He reached the underworld a second time. He and Eurydice were reunited, finally, in death. This is the ending the later versions prefer, and it has a certain satisfaction. But the myth in its original form does not require that comfort. The original form ends with the head floating and singing. It ends with music that continues past the body that made it. That is a different kind of ending. Persephone received his shade. She knew who he was. She had always known. Psyche is not a traditional myth of the underworld, but she descends, and she descends in the full terror of the word. She goes there alive, in the body, sent by Aphrodite to retrieve a vial of the beauty of Persephone herself. The task was designed to kill her. It was the last of the impossible tasks, the one meant to confirm that a mortal girl could not survive the full weight of divine hostility. Psyche had already sorted seeds and gathered golden fleece and captured water from the Styx. These tasks were brutal, and she had accomplished them with help. Ants, reeds, an eagle, the landscape itself taking pity on her grief. But the descent into the underworld, this was not a task that admitted assistance, except she was given a map. She was given by a speaking tower as she prepared to throw herself from it, because death by her own hand seemed the only way down. She was given instructions. Take 2 honey cakes, take 2 coins. Do not help the lame man with the load of wood. Do not help the women weaving at the river. Give the coin to Charon. Give the honey cake to Cerberus. Take nothing that is offered, accept no hospitality. And when Persephone gives you the box, do not open it. Psyche did all of this. She resisted the soft pleading traps that were set for her at every passage, the requests for help designed to take her coins and cakes and leave her stranded in the dark. She gave the coin, she gave the cake, she stood before Persephone. And Persephone, who received the request with a gravity that Psyche noted, the gravity of someone who's seen all of this before, who knows how these stories go. Persephone agreed to give her what she asked. But then, carrying the box back up, Psyche opened it. She was curious, or she was vain. She thought perhaps a small amount of divine beauty, barely a touch, just enough to please Eros when she reached him again. Or she was simply too tired not to. She opened the box, and what was inside was not beauty, but sleep, the sleep of the dead, and she collapsed on the road back to the world. Eros found her. Eros woke her. The tale continues, and it ends well, and Psyche becomes a goddess, and Aphrodite's enmity becomes grudging acceptance. But what I note is that Persephone gave the box willingly. She filled it with what she had to give. She understood exactly what the task was, and she completed her part of it with the straightforwardness of someone who does not play games with suffering. Her mercy was real. It was structured. It was bounded by the rules of the underworld. But within those rules, it was real. She helped the ones who came down correctly. She helped the ones who are truly grieving. She helped, and she was not cynical about it, even after all she had seen. The fourth figure I want to spend time with is not a hero in the traditional sense. She arrived in the underworld not in a story that has been handed down complete, but in the one way all the dead arrived. She died. I am speaking of Minthe. Minthe was a naiad, a water nymph of the river Cocytus, which flowed in the underworld, one of the 5 rivers of the dead, the river of wailing, whose name gives us our word lamentation. She was associated with Hades in some accounts, intimately associated before Persephone's arrival. What she was to Hades is described variously: a beloved, a consort, a favorite, someone who had Hades' attention in the long cold years when the underworld had no queen. And then Persephone came. Minthe, in the accounts that include her, did not accept the change quietly. She declared that Hades would return to her. She said that she was more beautiful, more worthy. She said what people in her position say when they have lost something they believed was theirs. Demeter, in some tellings, acts. Persephone, in others. Someone, the queen or the queen's mother, transformed Minthe into a plant. Into mint, specifically, the herb that grows near water and has that sharp quality, that persistence, that ability to spread beyond its boundaries and prove difficult to contain. I find this the part of the Persephone mythology that is hardest to simply accept. The transformation of Minthe is not mercy. It is power used without the complication of mercy. But then, Persephone had come into her throne through a kind of violence, and perhaps she had learned that the underworld does not always have room for the gentler resolutions. Or perhaps she was simply jealous. Perhaps the goddess of the dead, who by all other accounts was dignified and just and moved by genuine grief, was simply jealous of a water nymph who had once been close to her husband. The myth allows for this. It does not explain itself. Minthe became mint, and the fields near the underworld smelled of it, and the dead who passed through carried the scent on them, that sharp green smell like something that refuses to go quietly. Anyway, the great war of the gods, if you can call what I am about to describe a war, which requires 2 sides and an eventual resolution, and what happened with the Gigantomachy, had both of those things, even if the resolution was less satisfying than most, came after the establishment of Olympian order, and it came because order always generates the resistance to itself. The giants were born from the blood of Uranus when Cronos struck, born from the same wound that produced the Furies, born from damage and castration, and the violence necessary to end one world and begin another. They were enormous, armed, motivated by a grievance that was not entirely illegible. They were the children of the first sky and the first earth, and they watched the Olympians inherit what their parents had broken apart to create. The Gigantomachy was long and nearly lost. There was a prophecy, of course, that the giants could only be defeated with the help of a mortal. Zeus arranged for Heracles again, because Heracles was often the answer when the question required someone to be present in a situation where death was likely. The gods fought giants across the world, each pair matched by a logic that was partly symbolic. Athena against Enceladus, whose name meant earthquake, Poseidon burying polybotes under the island of Nisyros, Apollo and Artemis working as they always did, in terrible coordination. But the underworld was affected. The dead were shaken in their places. The rivers reversed briefly. Hades put on his helmet, the helmet of invisibility, the gift of the Cyclopes, which made him the unseen one in the only battle he ever fought openly. And he drove his chariot up to the surface to defend it, to defend the boundary that he himself embodied. Persephone did not fight. She was not a war goddess, but she held the underworld in its shape while Hades was absent from it, which is its own kind of warfare. The dead continued in their patterns. The rivers continued to flow. The punishments of Tartarus continued. She held the whole enormous dead kingdom steady, while the king went up to save the living world. And when he returned, they sat together on their twin thrones, and the underworld went on, as it always had, receiving the dead as it always would. What do you call a victory in a place where nothing is born and nothing grows? Their underworld wins by continuing. It wins by being necessary. Every death that has ever happened is a small confirmation of its permanence. The giants fell, and the earth received them. And they went, as everything goes, down. After the great battles, after the stabilizations, after the period when the world was young enough that the gods fought openly and their conflicts rearranged coastlines, after all of this, there came the period of the heroes, the period that the Greeks remembered as both closer and further than the divine age. The heroes were partly divine, which made them capable of things mortals could not manage. They were also mortal, which meant they died, which meant the stories about them had endings in a way that stories about gods generally do not. The hero age was the Greeks making themselves, imagining ancestors large enough to explain why they felt, sometimes like the diminished children of something enormous. The age of heroes looked backward from the Greek classical period, the way all golden ages look backward, with a nostalgia that is slightly untrustworthy, that makes the past glow in ways it probably did not glow for the people living it. Persephone received them all. Every hero who ever died, and most of them died spectacularly and young, came to her kingdom eventually. She knew their faces. She had received word of their coming in the way that all deaths send advance notice to the underworld. She received Achilles and sat him among the honored dead. She received Ajax, still furious, still unable to accept what had happened to him. She received Hector, who had been a good man in a bad situation. And she received him with the gravity that a good man in a bad situation deserves. She received ordinary soldiers whose names nobody remembered, and she received them all with the same impartiality. This is the underworld's democracy. It does not care what you are above. When Odysseus came, not yet dead, still alive, there in her realm by Circe's instruction, he came to the edge of her domain and dug a pit and poured blood into it. And the dead came to drink because blood was the one thing that let the shades briefly remember themselves, briefly become less shade and more person. Persephone was present in that scene as a pressure. The dead came near the blood. Odysseus saw the ones he recognized. And at the end, when he had spoken to enough of them, when the weight of the encounter had become almost too much, the shades gathered in such numbers around the pit, the sound of them, the weight of all that accumulated death. Odysseus was seized with what Homer describes as terror, a particular terror that Persephone was about to send against him the head of the Gorgon, the ultimate face of death. He fled. She did not send it. She did not need to. The terror was enough. The presence of her power was enough to send a hero who had survived nearly everything back to the light. That is the measure of her. I need to say something about the pomegranate again, now that we have circled around it long enough. The pomegranate is red. It contains dozens, sometimes hundreds, of seeds, small, numerous, sweet, and slightly acid, encased in a membrane that is bitter. To eat pomegranate is to commit to a process. You cannot eat it easily. You cannot eat it without staining your hands. You cannot eat it and not know that you are eating something deliberate. It requires participation. It requires intention. In the regions where pomegranates grow, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, the areas where Greek culture had its roots and its most intimate interactions, the pomegranate was associated with fertility, with the dead, with a threshold between worlds. It was placed in graves. It appeared in wedding ceremonies. It was both the fruit you gave to mark the beginning of a life shared and the fruit you gave to mark the end of a life. It sat at both borders. When Persephone ate the seeds, whichever number you accept, she incorporated both of these into herself. She became a thing that contained weddings and funerals simultaneously. She became the goddess who presides over the greatest transitions in any life, the ones for which we have the largest rituals and the least adequate language. She did not become this by accident. The myth insists on this, in the way I described, not by saying it, but by making every detail point at it. The flowers, the narcissus, the earth splitting. These are not the images of random tragedy. They are the images of a threshold being crossed. She crossed it. She ate the seeds. And she became who she was always going to become. Let me try to say something about time here, or about what the myth does with time. And then let me acknowledge that I am not sure this next part is entirely necessary, and I am including it anyway, because something in me wants to say it. The Greeks had a theory of ages that descended from gold to silver to bronze to iron, each one a little darker than the last, a little harder, a little more distant from the divine. Hesiod laid it out most clearly, though the theory was older than Hesiod and had versions in many cultures around the same period. The Golden Age was when gods walked with humans, and there was no labor and no death as we know it, or death as a kind of sleep, a gentle exit rather than a catastrophe. The Silver Age came after, and it was a little worse. The Bronze Age was worse still, violent, warlike, magnificent in his weapons. And then the Iron Age, which was Hesiod's own age, and is also, he would note, if he were here, our age, an age of labor and grief and modest expectations, where justice had grown shy. Persephone's story sits across this chronology in an interesting way. She belongs to the age when the gods were still arranging things, still working out the rules of the world, still eating their children and being vomited back up and drawing lots for the universe. She is early as mythological time goes. She is one of the arrangements that set the terms for everything that followed. But she also operates in the myths, in the age of heroes, which is the second to last age, the age when mortals were almost divine, when the offspring of gods and humans walked the earth performing impossible tasks. She is the one they come to for permission. She is the one who remembers the shape of the world when they have forgotten it or lost it, or are searching for it in the dark. The Iron Age, Hesiod says, will end badly. Zeus will destroy it when the children are born with grey temples, when shame and indignation abandon the earth and leave humans without the moral guides that make civilization possible. He lists the signs of the final deterioration. Guest will no longer honor host. Children will no longer honor parents. Oath breakers will flourish. Might will be right. The end. Persephone does not appear in Hesiod's end time. She presides over the dead in the underworld, receiving what the ages deliver to her. The golden age's dead came first, the happy dead, the gentle shades who became the divine guardians of the earth in their afterlives. The silver age's dead came next, the bronze, the heroes, the Iron Age dead, us, the ones who go down with grey temples, and the confusion of people who were never entirely sure what they were supposed to be doing. She receives them all with the same gravity. The underworld does not grade on a curve. What she knows after all this time, what the myth suggests she knows, though she does not speak it directly, it is not in her nature to make speeches, is that the descending cycle is not the whole story. Things go into the dark and come back, always. The seed comes back, she comes back. The pattern of return is not the exception, but the rule. The golden age looks lost, and perhaps it is, but the pattern it established, the pattern of the world trying, of the world being generative, of the world reaching toward light even in its darkest configurations. That pattern persists. She embodies it. She is the proof of it. Twice a year. The Elusinian mysteries deserve their own slow treatment, and they will not get it here because the secrecy was real and enforced and lasted long enough that we simply do not know what happened in the final moments of the initiation. We know the processional, the march from Athens to Eleusis along the sacred way, 18 miles, conducted in fasting and ritual and song. We know the drinking of the kykeon, a barley drink that may have contained ergot, a fungal compound that would produce visionary states, or may not. We know there was something shown, something said, something done. We know that the people who underwent the initiation, virtually every person of significance in the ancient world at some point, came away changed. Cicero said that among all the wonderful things Athens produced, nothing was more divine than the mysteries, because they turned the initiate away from savagery and toward humanity, and provided a way to live with joy, and, this is the part, provided a way to die with better hope. Better hope, that is the Eleusinian promise. It is not certainty. Nothing in Greek religion promises certainty. It is better hope, the hope that the dark is not the end, that what goes below can return, that the seed is not dead but sleeping, that Persephone went down and came back, and this means something, that you too might go down and the darkness might not be the last thing. 2,500 years of pilgrims walked those 18 miles. They walked them in the autumn, when the crops had been harvested and the world was beginning its annual descent. They walked toward Eleusis, toward Demeter's temple, toward the hall where the final mystery was revealed. They walked because the story of a girl who went below and returned as a queen had given them a grammar for death, that they could live inside. That is not nothing. That is possibly everything. The world after the mysteries, the world of late antiquity when Christianity was spreading and the old rites were being suppressed or adapted or forgotten, treated Persephone with a complexity that the later synthesis of the story did not quite manage. The Neoplatonists, Porphyry and Iamblichus and Proclus, developed elaborate allegorical readings of the myth in which the descent was the soul's descent into matter, the soul falling from pure spirit into the world of physical existence, experiencing itself as seized, as taken against its will, as trapped in the realm of decay and change. The pomegranate seeds were the commitments the soul made to embodied life. The return to the upper world was the soul's return to spiritual contemplation. Persephone became the soul in this reading, and her myth became a story about every single one of us, about what it means to be spirit, inside a body, inside a world that is always changing and always ending. I am not a Neoplatonist. I will tell you that. I am not sure I believe in a soul that descends from a purer realm. But I think the Neoplatonists were doing something real when they saw in Persephone's myth the structure of subjective experience, the feeling of being taken from somewhere, of having been given no choice about arriving in the particular life you find yourself in, of making commitments that bind you to the place you did not choose, and the hope, the pattern of return, the spring that follows even the hardest winter, as the pattern that makes the commitment bearable. She was queen. She is queen. The title does not shift tense, in the way that mythological truths do not shift tense. Something about the way winter light falls, particularly in the northern hemisphere, when the sun goes low and the light comes at an angle that makes shadows long and everything look like it is happening in a painting. Something about that light has always seemed to carry her weight in it. The way things darken earlier, the way the nights become longer, become more present, become harder to dismiss. That is Persephone going below, in the body memory of people who lived by agriculture and knew exactly what the shortened days meant. She takes the warmth with her, or she is the warmth, or the absence of warmth is the shape of her absence. It is hard to say which, maybe all three. And when the crocuses come up in March, the ordinary crocuses, the ones that push up through snow, the ones that have no business being that purple in that cold, that is Persephone coming back. That is the seed that was in the dark returning. The Greeks believed this not as a metaphor but as a fact. The flowers bloomed because the goddess returned, and her return caused them. We have switched the order. We say the flowers bloom because of biology and the lengthening of days, and we call the goddess a metaphor for that process. But a metaphor for something fundamental is not nothing. A metaphor that lasts 3,000 years has earned the right to be called something more than a metaphor. I think, and here is the anachronic urperty, the modern thought just below the surface, almost breaking through. I think the thing the Persephone story does that we still need is to take the experience of being taken somewhere you didn't choose, of having your entire life reorganized by something outside your control, and to say, and from this, you can become the queen. Not in spite of the dark, not having survived the dark, not having escaped the dark. From inside it, as its ruler. The dark is not the end of the story. The dark is the place where you find out what you are. The thought retreats. We are in the old world. The goddess is on her throne. There is something I want to say about how we talk about this myth now. The way it has moved through centuries of retelling. And I am not sure the mechanism I want to use for saying it is quite right. It is something like the way a song sounds different when it moves from one key to another. Or maybe, no, that is not quite it. The myth has moved through time the way a river moves through landscape. Always the same water, always the same direction. But the banks change, the riverbed changes, what the river touches changes. And so the river is itself and also different. And the difference is not a corruption of the original, but the original's way of persisting. Anyway, the Roman Proserpina, which is Persephone rendered in Latin, sits slightly differently. She is the same figure, the same story, but the Roman emphasis shifted toward the agricultural explanation, toward the seasonal myth, and away from the underworld queen's sovereignty. Roman religion was generally better at incorporating deities than it was at preserving their interior complexity. Proserpina was important, was honored, was present in Roman ritual, but something in her lost some of its ambiguity in translation. The pomegranate became more clearly a trick. Her stay in the underworld became more clearly an imposition. The question of whether she chose was answered in the Roman version more definitively. She did not choose. She was taken. There is a politics to this interpretation that I find myself watching across the centuries with something like recognition. The version of the story in which the woman did not choose, in which she was purely a victim, is neater. It requires no ambiguity. It lets you feel sympathy without complication. It resolves the moral problem by eliminating it, but it loses something true, something the Greek version was protecting in its ambiguity. The Greek version says, she ate the seeds. It does not say she was forced. It lets you hold both possibilities. It asks you to sit with the discomfort of not knowing whether the queen of the dead is also the woman who chose it. The poets understood this better than the religious authorities did, usually. Ovid knew what he was doing when he let Persephone's story be told in multiple voices. Claudian, the late antique poet who wrote the unfinished De Raptu Proserpinae, let Proserpine weave a tapestry of the cosmos before her descent. She was making the world in miniature on her loom when she was interrupted. This detail is not in the older sources. Claudian invented it or borrowed it from somewhere, and it is exactly right. She was making the world and was interrupted and went down and kept making it from the inside. The medieval world absorbed her awkwardly. Proserpina appeared in the dream vision poems, in the allegories, as the queen of the dead who governed the underworld with a cold authority the Christians found simultaneously useful and threatening. Dante's Inferno doesn't name her, but there are scholars who find her structure everywhere in it. Chaucer's Pluto and Proserpina, in the Merchant's Tale, are a married couple having an ordinary marital argument, which is either a degradation of the myth or its domestication, or possibly both. Shakespeare's Winter's Tale turns on the Persephone structure explicitly, gives it a final restoration that the myth never quite offered. The daughter lost and recovered, the winter broken. the statue that was a woman, alive. In the contemporary world, the myth has been claimed by writers who want to give Persephone back her agency, to make the descent an active choice, to rewrite the rape. And I am using the Latin word, the word that means seizure, which carried that meaning before it narrowed, as a willing abdication of the meadow. These retellings are almost always beautiful, and they are almost always doing something the poet needs to do, working something out, finding something necessary in the old structure. But I notice that they are reacting against a version that took away her choice, and in reacting, they sometimes go to the opposite extreme and make her departure entirely voluntary. And in doing so, they trade one simplification for another. The myth, in its ambiguity, holds more. It says, something happened that she did not choose, and from inside that thing, she made choices that defined her. It says, force and agency can coexist in the same story without cancelling each other. It says, the queen in the underworld is real, the grief of the mother is real, the pomegranate is real, and you do not have to choose between them. This is harder to tell. It requires holding multiple true things at once. It requires not resolving the story into comfort or into horror. It requires sitting with the pomegranate and its ambiguity and not asking it to explain itself. The cults of Persephone were widespread across the Greek world, concentrated in Sicily and in Attica, in Locri in southern Italy, where the votive plaques she received show her enthroned and serene and clearly in possession of the place. At Locri, the plaques show her receiving worshippers. She is not reaching for help. She is giving it. She is the source of whatever assistance the worshippers have come for. She is not a victim in these images. She is not primarily a daughter. She is the queen, and the worshippers come to her as subjects to a ruler they trust. The women of Locri brought her offerings related to marriage and childbirth. They brought her things that were both weddings and funerals. She who presided over both. They brought her pomegranates. They brought her flowers. They trusted her with the transitions of their lives, the moments when the self crosses from one form into another, when the girl becomes the wife or the woman becomes the mother, or the body becomes something that can no longer hold what it used to hold. She received the offerings. She received everything. She had, after all, crossed every border herself. She knew what it cost. She knew what waited on the other side. What remains of her now, in our world where the old religion has been gone for 1,000 years or more, is complex. She remains in the myth as a text, studied and retold and reinterpreted. She remains in the Elusinian mysteries as a sacred absence. We know what was promised. We do not know what was shown, and the gap between promise and revelation is where she still lives. She remains in the flowers that come up in March. She remains in the particular quality of autumn light, the golden late light of October, which the Greeks called the season of her departure, and which still carries something heavier than other seasons, a weight that has no immediate cause, an annual melancholy that comes on schedule and is not entirely unwelcome. She remains in every story about a person who went somewhere they didn't choose and found in that place something they could not have found elsewhere. Every story about authority earned in darkness. every story about someone who returned from a bad place carrying something new, something the bright world didn't know it needed. Every story about mercy that comes from someone who has been below and knows what it cost and gives it anyway. The archetype does not require a name. It does not require the Greek word, the specific myth. It operates in the structure of experience, descent, darkness, transformation, return. The pattern is older than Persephone. She merely received its most enduring form. She gave it her face and her name and her pomegranate, and the pattern became sayable in a way it hadn't been before, and people have been saying it ever since. I want to close with the Elusinian promise one more time, because I think it is the most important thing about this myth, and the thing most often lost in the seasonal explanation. Better hope. That is what the initiates were promised. Not certainty, not salvation in the Christian sense, not a resurrection of the body, not a specific paradise. Better hope. The hope that the dark is not the end. The hope that what goes below can return. The hope that the seed you cannot see is not gone, but sleeping. That the world that has gone cold will turn warm again. That the queen in the underworld is not there as a victim, but as a power. And that the powers who govern the dark are not indifferent to the ones who descend into it. The initiates walk back from Eleusis along the sacred way, having seen something, or heard something, or been shown something that they could not speak about. They walk back to Athens changed. And every year for nearly 2,000 years, the procession went out from Athens to Eleusis in the autumn, just as the world was beginning to go cold. The flowers fell, the earth split, she went below, and every spring the earth remembered what it meant to bloom. Good night. Wherever you are, I hope you have something warm, and I hope the dark tonight is the kind that rests, rather than the kind that presses. And if it is the pressing kind, if the dark is heavy tonight, if the winter feels longer than it should, I want you to know that the oldest story we have about winter says it ends. It has always ended. The queen comes back. Sleep well. We will see you next time.